I am a historian. I'm going to talk about the future, and that's a bit unusual because historians usually speak about the past. Probably heard that before. They usually speak about, the British Empire in the 19th century, but I'm very interested in the questions of war and peace. I am very convinced that now, in the year 2016, we live in interesting times. Many things change. We see the war in Syria, we see other wars, and we all ask this question: will we have more wars or will we have more peace? And of course, I don't know where we will be in the year 2050. It is possible that we will have more wars, okay? It is possible that we have a third world war in the 21st century, that it will be nuclear, who knows? And it's also possible that we have more peace. So both are possible. And this picture was taken during the Iraq War. For me, this war was a war for resources, an oil war, okay? And we have 1 million people killed now in the Iraq War. So that's one of the very big wars, and all of us are familiar with. And so many people hope that technology will save us. That's very normal. Human beings always hope, okay, technology will save us. We will have green growth. We will have 100% renewable energies. And then we don't have any resource wars anymore, okay? That's one of the big hopes for the 21st century. I personally have this hope as well. I do have solar cells on my house in Switzerland, and I have an electric car, and I think there's a lot of potential also for the industry. But at the same time, we must keep in mind that there are old forces who keep us captive. There's the coal industry, for instance. It's the coal industry in Germany, and they have a business case, okay? They're not just going to vanish. So you have the coal industry, which will stay there. You have the oil industry, you have the gas industry, and you have the nuclear industry. So this transition to renewable energies will be a long one, and it will be a difficult one. So I try to explain to people that most of us don't even realize how much dependent we are, for instance, on oil. Every day we need 90 million barrels of oil, every day. And the barrel has 159 liters, so that's quite a lot, 90 million of these barrels. And it equals 45 super tankers. So this very big ship here is a super tanker. It carries oil. And of these ships, we need every day 45. That means that our dependency on oil is very large. And if you go back to the year 1945, we only used 6 million barrels of oil, and now we use 90. So all we have done during the last 70 years is actually increasing our dependency on fossil fuels. This means we are now taking greater risks to get access to the oil that we so desperately need. We even go and take oil that is not liquid. Okay, this is a form of oil that you find in Canada. It's called tar sand, and it's not liquid. So how do we do it? We go to Canada, we cut down the wood, and then it looks like that. So we behave very much like a drug addict who is not aware of the damage that he does to himself and to his environment, because just we need it, so we go and get it. So my vision really is for the 21st century that we slowly leave oil, gas, coal, and nuclear behind us, and that we go towards renewable energy. But obviously, that's a vision, and there's a long road, and there are many obstacles, and it's unsure whether we ever get there. But if we have a system based on renewable energies, we will not have any resource wars anymore. There's a second problem, however. We have the military. And the military is convinced that it has a very important role in the 21st century. The military has always said that they are a force for peace. And in every nation, that's the same. That's in Hungary, that's in Switzerland, that's in China, in the US. Every military has always argued that they are a force for peace. But if you just take the last 100 years, you see that somehow it didn't work out, okay? And then what we do is we look at the military of the different nations, and we come to the conclusion we should have less military. We should have less military spending. And as a historian, my question is also, what is the biggest military on the world? And that's the American military. That's why we call it the US empire. And some people find the term offensive, okay? They don't like the term, and you don't hear it in television or newspapers. But for historians, for us, that's the normal term, because it means that the United States is now the most powerful nation. They rule the world, as the British ruled the world in the 19th century, and as the Romans ruled not the whole world, but parts of the world 2,000 years ago. That means they have a lot of influence. They have 700 military bases across the globe. No other country has 700 military bases. Furthermore, the defense spending of the United States is $600 billion a year. That's $2 billion a day. Just think what you could do if you had $2 billion for your company, just for a day. Okay? It really is a lot of money. And you have to see that China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia also have military spending, but it's much smaller. Okay? So if we talk about war and peace in the 21st century, we have to ask, will the US empire be willing to reduce its military spending? We don't know. Then a crucial issue comes to mind, and that's the role of the media. We know that we all consume media several hours every day, several hours. So we read newspapers, we watch television, we listen to the radio, we go to lectures, and that's media consumption. And media can help to promote peace, okay? If media shows the suffering of war, then it can help to promote peace. But media can also be used to promote war. Media can spread lies. Politicians tell lies. The media can spread the lies, and in the end you have the lies in your living room. And here is one example with the weapons of mass destruction before the attack on Iraq in 2003. So in this case, media was not the solution, but it was part of the problem. And in Switzerland, I now research what American soldiers think who are in Iraq, okay? Do they think that they are there in a war of conquest to get access to the oil? No, they don't think that. They think they are in Iraq because Saddam Hussein was responsible for the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. That's what the US soldiers in Iraq think. Now that's total nonsense, okay? It's not true. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, but they heard it so many times over the media that they believe it. And that's the situation we are in. We have a lot of confusion and we have a lot of lies. And these soldiers paint the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on their helmet. And you know, 9/11 is now 15 years ago. But it's such an emotional moment in contemporary history that many people remember where they were on that day, okay? And that is very, very rare. Usually people don't remember where they were, okay? Something happened, but you know, it's history. But with this day, 15 years ago, for all of us, it was a shock, and that's why I remember when somebody says, okay, I was working, somebody else says I was cooking, somebody else was, I was at the hairdresser, who knows? But you will remember where you were. And what we now do as a historian, we go back to 9/11 and we look at what happened there. Because there are many different stories on these terrorist attacks. And the official story, as brought to us by the media, was one tower was hit by an airplane, and the other tower was hit by an airplane. So airplane, airplane, tower, tower. That is 9/11 for most people in Europe and also in the United States, because that's the way you've seen it on television. What some people don't realize that in the back you have this building number 7. Do you see that building with the number 7? And this building also collapsed on September 11. So you have 3 buildings, but you only have 2 planes. So this is the 3rd building. It went down on September 11, 2001. And now we historians have to explain how come that 2 planes can destroy 3 buildings. And just for your basic knowledge, who in the room did not know that 3 buildings collapsed on that date? Maybe a show of hands. Okay. So it is very good to admit that our knowledge of terrorism is very limited. Okay? We're on a very superficial level. We look at it, we hear something about it, and then we move on with our daily business. And what I do, I take the official report, which was published in 2004. It's 600 pages thick, and my history students had to read it, okay? In Switzerland, I teach history, so the students at university had to read it. And I tell them, please find out what the report says about the collapse of World Trade Center 7. And unfortunately, the report does not mention the collapse of World Trade Center 7. So the official report of the American empire on the biggest terrorist attack in world history is missing a building. Now you can't say, no problem, let's not be picky about it, you know, 2 or 3 buildings, that's a minor detail. You have to really ask for the truth, even if it's painful. You have to say, that's not okay. So really, this report, you can't use it, okay? It's of no value. They didn't get the number of buildings right. So in 2008, we had a new report. This one was published by the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, which is a branch of the US government. And they said, the building here, you see, is a building with 81 steel columns. They said, the building went down because column 79 was weakened by office fires. And that's now the official story as you have it on Wikipedia. Okay? World Trade Center 7 fell due to office fires. What I did with this data, I went to architects and asked them, do you think that's plausible? And I said, no. They say, if you have 81 columns, you must destroy all 81 columns at the same second for the building to fall symmetrically. You see the building goes down symmetrically. This is the question we now have with that building. And they say it has to be controlled demolition. It can't be fire. And that's, you know, the argument which is now in the room. Was it controlled demolition or was it fire? And now this is something that you have to decide for yourself. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm just telling you what we as historians have found out in the last 15 years. And obviously, you know, it's a highly political issue. I mean, everybody knows that. Here you have former President Bush and the King of Saudi Arabia, Abdullah. And obviously, it would be very interesting to talk with Saudi Arabia about terrorism, about 9/11, about all these questions. It would be very interesting to talk with Bush about these questions. But we can't do that. These people are very high-ranking people. We can't talk to them. And what they do is they tell us that we're not allowed to ask questions. President Bush said, we must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September 11. He said that just 1 month of the terrorist attacks, and he said it in front of the United Nations. So what he really said is, trust me, don't ask any questions. And he used that word, conspiracy theory, to ban all questions. And it has worked, you know? You might think, oh, maybe that's not going to work. Yes, it worked. And now you have a new war, okay? The war in Syria. And again, politicians come forward, they have their stories, they say, Putin has his story about the war in Syria, the ES has their story. They always have a story when they fight the war. And for us, the problem is that we have to either blindly believe these stories or that we start to ask questions. Because as a historian, I can tell you, wars are always fought for self-interest, for money, for power, not to help somebody, okay? And then I say, okay, let's look again. Let's look again at the stories that the media presents us with. And let's look at ABC News. This is an American television channel. What they said after 9/11, here on the 16th of September 2001, they said, FBI investigators discovered the passport of Saddam al-Suqami, one of the terrorists aboard American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane to hit the World Trade Center. Okay, that's what you find in our news. And the question is, where did they find that passport? Where? Here. You have to ask yourself, do you believe it or not? That's what it says. They found the passport. I didn't make that up. They found the passport. Here. It was their lucky day. There's no plane, there's no body, no nothing but the passport. So where does all this leave us? I think we are in a moment where we feel, okay, we can't change the energy system. This is complicated. Nuclear, coal, oil. For a human being, it's very difficult. For an ordinary citizen like you and me, it's very difficult. Then we feel powerless. Then we think about defense spending. We see $600 billion. And we think, okay, I can't do anything about it, okay? I can't do anything about the defense spending of all these countries. Not even of my own country, it's difficult to reduce the defense spending. So we have a tendency to say we're totally powerless, but that is wrong. We have a lot of power, and our power really is to decide what is the story in our head, okay? We can decide on all issues, Syria, Iraq, 9/11, whatever you want. We can always decide what the stories in our head are. We can decide what we trust and what we distrust. And there we have immense power, and I'm personally convinced that this will make the difference about war and peace in the 21st century. The stories in our head. Let me go into some further detail into the war in Syria. If you allow, the war in Syria is now ongoing. It's one of the biggest conflicts that we have. It's more than 400,000 people killed in the war in Syria. And as we sit here, they shoot each other over there. And it's not that far away, okay? The war in Syria has influenced Europeans because Europeans are involved. We observe it. We see the refugees. We have it in the news. It's the big war right now, like the Vietnam War was a big war in the 60s and 70s. Now, the United States, whom I always refer to as the empire, is bombing Syria for almost 2 years now. And as in every war, they say, we bomb to help. France is also bombing Syria since September 2015. And trust me, the French, they tell their population also, we bomb to help. Russia is also bombing Syria since September 2015, and also the Russians say, we bomb Syria to help. The Germans, some of you might have noticed, have decided in December 2050 to also send military aircraft to Syria. Right now, they're not dropping bombs. They said they're just doing reconnaissance. So they look where the others can bomb. And the British, obviously, don't want to be far away. They're now also bombing Syria. So it looks insane, okay? So many countries are bombing Syria. What's going on? I think in the background, you have to look at oil, okay? Very often I come back to oil, I come back to gas, and I look where are the pipelines and actually where are military bases and who can get access to the resources, because I'm profoundly convinced that many resource wars are being fought today under the pretext of fighting terrorism, okay? People say we have to fight terrorists, and the terrorists happen to be exactly where the oil and the gas is. In 1908, the first oil was discovered in Iran. At the time, the country was called Persia. So it's only 110 years ago that the oil was discovered in the Middle East. At that time, we didn't use so much oil. Today, we need 90 million barrels. I said that before, and it's always good to remember that figure. 90, that's 90 million barrels of oil. That's what we need every day. And obviously, if you look now where the oil is, you see this green area is the conventional oil, okay? And the conventional oil is that oil which is easy to get, cheap. The tar sands is complicated, deep water is complicated, Arctic oil is complicated. And where is this oil? It's here. You know, do you see the green? That's Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. So actually the cheap oil happens to be in the Persian Gulf. And it's not going to move away, okay? It's going to stay there during the next 50 years. That's why we have so many wars there. And if you look at the world map of religions, you can see this color, Christian religions. Australia, New Zealand are Christian, Europe, most of it is Christian, except from Bosnia and Albania. North and South America are Christians. India is Hinduism, China is atheistic communist system. And the green countries are the Muslim countries, okay? And now you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see the oil is where the Muslims are. That's how it is. And you know, it's not that the Muslims moved there when they heard that there is oil. So it happens to be like that, and it will be like that in the future. And the American empire realized this many years ago, okay, 70 years ago. They realized the oil is there, so we have to have good relationships with Saudi Arabia. So you have here the American president, Franklin Roosevelt, meeting with the king of Saudi Arabia. And they decided, let's cooperate very closely. You give me the oil, and I give you the weapons, okay? And that has been a deal during the last 70 years, that the Americans have always given very, very sophisticated weapons to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has guaranteed for constant oil supply. The oil from Persia is yours. That's what Roosevelt said to Churchill. The oil from Iraq and Kuwait we share, and the oil from Saudi Arabia, that belongs to us. This is a quote from the year 1944. I have written a book on it. Unfortunately, the book is only in German, but you know, I tell you the most important parts of the book. and it's very important that in Hungary and in Switzerland and in other countries, we realize that the British and that the Americans, for a long, long time, have decided who owns which country in the Middle East. We don't even think of it, but that's how it was done. They said, Iran for the British, Iraq we share, Saudi Arabia for the Americans. Okay, that was the deal. And when the Iranians, this is the Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh, when the Iranians decide that they want to have the oil themselves, okay, they nationalized it. So the oil belonging to British Petroleum was nationalized in the 1950s, and the Iranians said, now it's our oil, okay? We live here, it's our oil. We sell it, we keep the profits. At that moment, the British were very angry, okay, because they said, that's our oil. You happen to live there, but it's our oil. Funny thinking, is it? And then the British Secret Service, MI6, together with the American Secret Service, CIA, went to Iran and overthrew the democratically elected government of Mossadegh. How did they do it? A regime change is very easy to do. You just create chaos. You always have to create chaos. That's what they did in Ukraine in 2014. You have to create chaos, and then you can overthrow the government. That's how it's done. At the time, people realized in Iran that the Americans and the British were carrying out a regime change. They realized it. So they wrote on the walls in Tehran, Yankees go home. Keep in mind, that was the time before Facebook, so you really had to write it on a wall. So it's a long time ago. And the Americans took a long time to apologize. Only in the year 2000, US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright said, it's not difficult to understand that many Iranians dislike this American intervention into their internal affairs. So she sort of apologized 50 years later for having overthrown the government of Iran, together with the British. I research oil and gas wars for many years already, and I tell you, one of the strongest propaganda tools that is being used to sell oil and gas wars are babies. Okay? That's very strange, because you think, oil and babies, what does that have to do? Nothing. There's nothing to do with each other, but babies are a very emotional topic for all of us. Why? Because we, at one point, all were babies. That's empirically proven. We all were babies. It's, you know, depends on the years you take, but we all were babies. And that means we always link to the topic of babies very emotionally. And I want to take you back to the year 1990. At that time, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. That was illegal, okay? One country is not allowed to attack another country. So Saddam Hussein is a war criminal. At the time, the British and the Americans said, now we have to drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And then American officers were critical and said, no, I'm not going to go to the Kuwait war. That probably is a war for oil. And then President Bush Sr. said, no, no, this is a fight from the good forces against the evil forces. We are the good forces, and they are the evil forces. And just to make this very clear to everybody, why Saddam Hussein is evil, the following story circulated. They said, the soldiers of Saddam Hussein, they did not only go to Kuwait, they went to the hospital in Kuwait City. And there they took the babies, the newborn, tiny little sweet babies, they took them out of the incubators and smashed them on the floor. They killed the babies. This is not a story that the president told, and it's not the story that General Schwarzkopf said. Schwarzkopf was the commander of the war. It's a story that a girl told, okay? This girl said, I worked in the hospital as a nurse, and they took the babies and left them on the floor to die. And the girl cried while she said it. So everybody was moved, okay? That's how war propaganda works. You have a very strong story, a very emotional story, and then everybody goes, oh, let's go to war. Where's that? Iraq, Iran, is that the same country? So people are very emotional. You have it in television. Television on 9/11 and also during the Kuwait War is the #1 tool to spread propaganda. Without television, propaganda would be very weak. And then after the war, you know, everybody's dead, then we come, okay? I always have to apologize. Historians are very slow, I have to admit, okay? When everybody's already killed, the war is over, then we come and say, okay, let's look at this again. Did she really work in that hospital? And we find out, no, she never worked in that hospital. Then we research, were these babies killed? No, there were no dead babies. Then we go, why did she look like a Kuwaiti girl? Well, she was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador in the United States. So she was also abused, okay? A teenage girl does not start a war just out of a fancy idea. We have a public relations company which is called Hill & Knowlton. They developed the story, and they had a budget of $1 million. So don't you think that war propaganda is somebody doing it, you know, in his cellar with a budget of 50 euros? Okay, it's not like that. It's done professionally. If they sell cars professionally, why should they not sell wars professionally, okay? We don't think of it, but that's how it's done. And the budget for this company, Hill & Knowlton, was covered by Kuwait. So Kuwait paid for the war propaganda, and after the war, they got war reparations in billions from Iraq. So, you know, invest $1 million, get a few billion, it works. That's how it's done. And the Americans got a military base in Kuwait, in the middle of all the oil. And now we hear about this new war, okay? People have forgotten these stories about, you know, babies and Kuwait. It's very important to know a few examples of war propaganda, okay? One example is the weapons of mass destruction before the Iraq War, 2003. That was a lie. And the other example is the baby example with the Kuwait War. If you have two examples, that's very good. Most people have no example. Okay, you ask somebody, do you know an example of war propaganda? People know, oh yeah, there's a lot of war propaganda. Then you say, do you know one specific example? They say, no. No, but I know that tonight we have a football game, which is very important. So, you know, that's the focus. And right now, obviously, we have this war in Syria. And if you read our newspapers, then they tell us all the time that President Bashar al-Assad has to be overthrown because he's evil. That's it. You read it every day. No oil, no gas, no nothing. It's just an evil man, he has to be overthrown. It's the same story that we heard with Saddam Hussein. It's the same story that we heard with Milosevic. It's the same story that we heard with Gaddafi. It's the same story that we heard with Osama bin Laden. We always hear there's an evil guy and has to be killed, and the promise is that afterwards things will be really good. Look at Libya right now. You know, they say, if we overthrow Gaddafi, you will have democracy, freedom of rights. People will enjoy, you know, civil liberties. Nothing. Libya is a destroyed country. Different groups killing each other. Look at Afghanistan. Anything good happened there? No. People shooting each other all the time. Look at Iraq, okay? Yes, Saddam Hussein is dead. But the military of Saddam Hussein is now the backbone of IS. So with Assad, I think it is very important to look at the pipelines. Okay? We do have a very big gas field here in the Persian Gulf. That's the biggest gas field of the entire world, the biggest. And there are two countries who want to exploit it. One is Qatar, and the other country is Iran. And they're not friends, okay? Qatar is a Sunni Muslim country, and Iran is a Shia Muslim country. And it happens to be that this gas field is one big thing, so whoever empties it first is the winner. Do you see the problem? Now, Qatar has said, we want to build a pipeline to bring the gas to the European market, because down here, the gas is worth nothing. You have to bring it here, to Budapest, to Zurich, to Munich. That's where you get a real good price. And to bring it to the European market, you can either make liquefied natural gas and put it on a tanker. That takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. It's not such a good idea. They do it, but it's not such a good idea. It's better to build a pipeline. But if you build a pipeline and you look at the map, you see that at one point you have to go through Syria. So what Qatar did, they went to Syria and said, hello, Assad, we'd like to build a pipeline. Is that okay with you? And he said no. And then Iran came and went to Assad and said, can we build a pipeline? And Assad said, yes. And there you have it, okay? Assad decided to build the pipeline with the Iranians and not with the Qatari. And this meant the whole split that you have today. The countries that want to overthrow Assad are Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Because the Qataris went to the Turkish and they said, you know, we're going to build this pipeline, it's going to be all good. And Assad said no. And Iran said, can we build this pipeline? And Assad said yes. So Iran wants Assad to stay in power. For me, it's a pipeline war, very clearly. The Americans obviously tell you a completely different story. They say it has nothing to do with pipelines, it has nothing to do with oil and gas. They always have a shock story. You know, 9/11 is a shock story, the dead babies are shock stories. In fact, all wars are being sold as shock stories. You probably have realized by now that all wars are shock stories, otherwise people don't even pay attention. And what's the shock story here? American beheaded by ISIS, okay? They say, we have to go to this war because ISIS has beheaded 2 American journalists, James Foley and another one, and that comes on CNN, and very shortly after that, Obama, American president, says, in a very barbaric way, they have beheaded 2 American journalists. IS is a danger for people in Iraq and Syria. They can threaten the US. In this fight, we cannot count on the regime of Assad. This government has no legitimacy. Do you see the very subtle twist, okay? First, it's about beheading. Then it's about ISIS, but Assad is fighting ISIS, okay? He doesn't like ISIS at all. He says it's a terrorist group, he has to destroy it, has to get rid of the country. And then the Americans said, and we're not only fighting ISIS, we're also fighting Assad. Do you see that? For people, it's too complicated. It happens very quickly, so they only know they're bombing there, but are they bombing Assad or ISIS? Yeah, we're bombing both. And that's the bombing, okay? The bombing started in 2014. And then what you see is these planes take off from an aircraft carrier, and nobody is thinking about oil and gas. Nobody, okay? Everybody's thinking about beheading. And then I say, okay, who is actually protesting? And you see, Iran is protesting. Iran said the US attack were illegal because they had not been authorized by the Syrian government. And Iran is right, okay? It is not okay if one country bombs another country. It would be completely wrong if Syria had decided to bomb Switzerland. It's illegal. It's as illegal than if you step out of the room here and you shoot somebody in the street. It's illegal. It's called murder. If you, as a country, bomb another country, it's illegal. If you call first and say, is it okay if I bomb your country, and the other one says, yeah. That's what the Russians did, okay? That's what the Russians did. They called Assad and said, we can help you with ISIS. Is it okay if we bomb? Assad said, yes, come over and bomb. Then the government opens the airspace, that's possible. But if you don't call first, okay, it's illegal. And then I look at the beheadings, okay? The American story is, it's all about beheadings. You've seen this. Then they say, The problem with the Syria war, and I'm not sure how it is here in Hungary, but in Switzerland, many people think the Syria war, we fight this, or the Americans fight it because people are being beheaded. And that's awful. You shouldn't behead people, so we have to fight this war. Very, very stupid level of information. I mean, no oil, no gas, just beheadings. And then I say, well, then look at Saudi Arabia, okay? We have a lot of beheadings there. Have you realized that? In Saudi Arabia, you had 73 people killed last year, sentenced to death, through beheadings, most of them. So if you work on this idea of let's bomb every country that is beheading somebody, then you also have to bomb Saudi Arabia. But then it becomes complicated, because then you say, what am I doing actually? Then you say, okay, systematic approach is that it's a fight against the death penalty, okay? Because some people use beheading, some people use electric shocks. There are many very cultivated ways to kill somebody. And the point is, if you decide to bomb all countries who have the death penalty, then it becomes really complicated, okay? You have to bomb China, you have to bomb the US, and you know, it's not a good idea. So really this story with the beheading, I don't believe it. It's, if you look at it, and this is in German, but I can translate it, it basically means that Saudi Arabia and the IS have the same system, okay? It's called the Sharia system. And what they do is, they have death penalty. To the left, that's IS, and to the right in green, that's Saudi Arabia. So it says blasphemy. If you say you don't believe in God, death penalty in IS, death penalty in Saudi Arabia, okay? It's the same. If you consume alcohol in the IS territory, you get with the whip, like that. And also in Saudi Arabia, the judge can decide. If you break in the marriage, okay? If you destroy the marriage, you're being stoned, okay? Stoned in IS, and you're being stoned in Saudi Arabia. It's just the Sharia, okay? It's very strange for us. We think that is really strange. Probably I'm going to drink alcohol tonight, you know, with no bad feelings. But it's just a very different world. If you have sex before you are married, you again get with the whip, right? Very severe. If you're a thief and you steal something, you get your hand cut off. And that's in the IS territory, and that's in Saudi Arabia. It's exactly the same. So the thing is, we have to realize that some Muslims are very radical, and they believe in the Sharia. That's what they do. If you make a robbery, that you have amputation of the left hand and the right foot. Both. You're not going to do much robbery after that. And the same is in Saudi Arabia. If you're a homosexual, you're killed. Death penalty. In IS territory, and also in Saudi Arabia. And if you leave Islam, death penalty, death penalty. So what I want to explain is, if you look at this, and it really is about Christian values, then you would expect the United States to really have a very, very strong word with Saudi Arabia, you know? To talk with them and say, you know, this is not okay for our values. But is that happening? No. It's not happening. So you can't make sense of all of this unless you look at oil and gas. If you look at it from a perspective of oil and gas, it makes perfect sense. Saudi Arabia produces 10 million barrels every day out of 90 million that we need. And the US, they need 20 million barrels every day. Okay, they're the biggest consumer. And this is the biggest producer. So here you actually have the biggest addict and the biggest dealer, if you allow. But that is the situation. That is the situation we're in. And if we don't look at oil and gas, if we don't look at the military, we will not understand what's going on. And some people say, okay, but then with Obama, everything was different, right? No. No, it just continued. Obama has cultivated very close links to Saudi Arabia, although Saudi Arabia promotes international terrorism in many countries, okay? That's the Wahhabite Islam is very radical. And they believe that their religion is the only one and that you should kill everybody else. I don't think that's a good position, okay? I think everybody should choose his own religion and leave everybody else to choose. You can be an atheist, you can be a Jew, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Catholic, a Protestant. Okay, in Hungary, like in Switzerland, we have freedom of choice. Everybody can choose his religion. But that's not the way the Saudis see it. If you're ready, we maybe should look at how radical Muslims have been used in the past. In Afghanistan in 1979, the cooperation of the US empire with radical Muslims started, okay? Because here in Europe, we always get that story, we would never ever cooperate with radical Muslims, with jihadis, okay? Never. With mujahideen. We would never do that. That's not true, okay? That's just a lie. If you are a historian, you know that in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, okay? And then the Americans supported the mujahideen with stingers. These are missiles you can carry here, and if you press a button, you know, you have a big rocket coming out and you destroy a helicopter. That was the whole idea of the Afghanistan war. And the CIA cooperated with the mujahideen. So actually CIA and Muslim terrorism, hand in hand. Okay? Brzezinski at the time was the national security advisor of President Carter, and he said, according to the official version of history, CIA aid to the mujahideen began during 1980, that is to say after the Soviet army invaded at Christmas '79. But the reality secretly guarded until now is completely otherwise indeed. It was in July, so half a year before the Soviets invaded, that President Carter signed the first directive for secret aid to the opponents of the pro-Soviet regime in Kabul, and that very day I wrote a note to the president in which I explained to him that in my opinion this aid was going to induce a Soviet military intervention. So, the CIA wanted the Soviets to invade in Afghanistan and therefore supplied the mujahideen with weapons, because they wanted to give the Soviets their Vietnam. At the time, President Carter was in the office, and Brzezinski was his national security advisor. Brzezinski is from Poland. His parents came from Poland. So Osama bin Laden was supported in Afghanistan in the 1980s because Washington was fighting Moscow, okay? And the old game that we see in history again and again is the enemy of my enemy is my friend, okay? It's not a real friend, okay? It's not that Washington loves radical Muslims, but they think radical Muslims are sometimes useful to really hurt somebody. So we give them weapons, we give them arms, everything, money. In fact, the CIA and Saudi Arabia had jets taking off from Saudi Arabia, flying directly to Afghanistan. And that's how you have the radical jihad starting there. Now, the journalist made this interview in 1998, so that's before 9/11, and he asked Brzezinski, you don't regret anything, right? You don't regret. And he said, regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into an Afghan trap, and you want to regret it. He said, it's a good idea. And the question says, and neither do you regret having supported Islamic fundamentalism, having given arms and advice to future terrorists. And he says that in 1998. And he says, no, what is more important to the history of the world, the Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Empire? Some stirred up Muslims or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War? So must keep in mind, stirred up Muslims is what we call today the terrorist menace. And these guys were used in Afghanistan, and I think these guys are now being used to get rid of Assad. It's very complicated, you know. It's not, you can't overthrow Assad very easily. But you have Saudi Arabia, you have Qatar, and you have Turkey, who all support the IS. They support it. It's insane, and you would think, how can they do that? It's illegal, it's a crime. But they do it because they hope that IS will overthrow Assad. I've talked about 9/11, but that was 3 years after the interview. Okay, and the time when he gave the interview, nobody would say some stirred up Muslims are not a problem, because Washington always thinks that they can control the Muslims. They used them in the Bosnia War as well. Some of you might know, okay? In the Bosnia War, when it was about, you know, destroying Yugoslavia, they used the Muslims, flew them in. And now you see the Russians are helping Assad, and what they are doing is they're trying to defend Latakia and Tartus, two places where the Russians have military bases, okay? The Russians have military bases in Syria, and that's why they help Assad. Because if Assad is being removed, the Russians don't have these military bases anymore. So every country is always fighting for their self-interest. So Assad went to Putin in October 2015, and Putin asked him whether he should send him soldiers and airplanes, and Assad said, yes, please. And so the Russians, together with Assad, are fighting ISIS. The Americans are secretly supporting the opposition to Assad, and they're fighting Assad at the same time. And the Turkish, they have a very complicated role. The Turkish, they're fighting the Kurds, and they say the Kurds are terrorists, and they want to overthrow Assad. It's quite a mess. I can give you more details about the Turks later. But this is the situation we have right now. Okay, we have Russian military jets, and obviously you see there in red, Syria, that's a Russian military base. But if you look at the larger picture and you see the American military bases, they're in blue. And it just happens that in our newspapers, you never see such a map. Never. I don't know how it is in Hungary, but in Switzerland, we always see the map, Russian military base in Syria. Russians are an imperialist power. They have to leave Syria. And then I say, okay, I understand. How about American military bases? You don't see it. So this map, we did it at my institute. So we went to the records, and for every country that you have an American military base, we colored it blue. The most famous is obviously this one in Guantanamo in Cuba. It's an American military base. You have another base in Afghanistan. You have a base in Germany, obviously. You have Ramstein. You have many military bases. Obviously in Japan, after the defeat in the Second World War, Americans established military bases in Japan. Obviously in South Korea, Australia, different parts of Europe. Not in Hungary that I know, right? You don't have military bases. No Russian, no American military bases.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay. Otherwise, tell me, but then I have to update the map. And tell me which color. Okay. So this is one of the military bases of the US empire. And obviously, the military-industrial complex has a strong interest that these wars continue. Okay? If I say that I want to reduce military spending, that I want to reduce the military in every country of the world, then the military-industrial complex says, no, we need the military. But as a historian, I've looked at the military, and I know that the military has been fighting wars again and again and again. And if there is no reason, they come up with a reason. Okay? They will invent a reason. For instance, they had one idea to blow up a ship in Guantanamo, blow up an American ship, and blame it on Fidel Castro in order to justify an invasion. They didn't do that then, okay? But it was just an idea, and we have the original documents from the Pentagon, where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff write, we should explode an American ship in Guantanamo. Just blow it up. And that, the American public would then be sufficiently angry, and we can just make a normal invasion of Cuba. And how big the military-industrial complex is, people don't realize. It's 600 billion, I said that before. And if you compare it to China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, France, UK, Germany, Japan, India, I put Switzerland here just because I have a lot of talks in Switzerland, but Hungary is like Switzerland. It's very small, very small. And for us, it is difficult to actually convince other countries to reduce their military spending. It's very difficult indeed. In the end, I think what matters a lot is what is the story in your head. Because as long as the story in your head is, we fight these wars because these are evil dictators, or we fight these wars because of weapons of mass destruction, or we fight these wars because 9/11 was clearly Osama bin Laden, okay? People are confused. And as long as they're confused, as with the dead babies, you can lead them into wars. So I think here we really have a lot of power. We have a lot of power. You can decide for yourself what to believe, what not to believe. And what we use is the internet now, okay? This is something I'm very amazed. Like, historians usually talk to a group of students, and it's like 30 people in the room. Or they write a book, and it's like 10,000 people who buy the book. That's small. But now with the internet, here I gave a talk in Germany at Tübingen University, and it's now 600,000 people that watch the talk. So the digital revolution, YouTube, has allowed peace research to have a much bigger voice. Until, they switch off the internet, we'll see. But until that moment, we can actually educate everybody who's interested about secret warfare and current events. So that's from my side. This is my little institute. It's called the Swiss Institute for Peace and Energy Research. We're just 4 people, okay? We're very small. But I'm here now in Budapest, and I really enjoy it to be here. Thanks very much.